Hello, listening audience. This is Michael Cross here with another episode of Unlock the Door Radio, where we like to ask the questions that the mainstream media often fails or doesn't want to deal with. Tonight, we have a very, very interesting guest. His name is Hen Mazig, and he's with an organization known as Stand With Us. And, well, I'm just going to let him go into this. Thank you for coming on the show, Hen. Tell us a little bit about your organization and what its goals are.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure. Stand With Us is an organization that was funded 14 years ago. Our mission is to educate about Israel. We feel that there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions about Israel, about the Jewish state. And our goal is to educate. We believe that education is the path to peace. And we are working with the younger generation, with students on high schools, on college campuses, and in communities as well. We have 17 offices around the world. We have 2 headquarters. One is in Jerusalem, where I work as the Israel Education Director, and we have another headquarters in Los Angeles. We also have offices in London, in South Africa, and representatives in South Africa. In Shanghai, we just opened a new office. But we're trying to bring people the facts. We believe that in order to have a real conversation, people need to know the facts. Although many people don't want to get confused with the facts, we're trying to bring the honest truth to the public and
Yes?
Michael?
Yes, I lost you there for a second.
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Just continue.
I'll start about Stand With Us from the beginning.
No, you can just go ahead. We just lost a couple seconds there. Just essentially, okay. You're talking about bringing facts out, and I originally became acquainted with your organization because I saw some information about history of an event that took place in 1948. And could you tell us a little bit about some of the things that have happened that people aren't really aware of right now?
So are we talking about the creation of Israel or about the Jewish refugees from Arab countries?
Yeah. The thing is, in the press, we hear a lot about the situation as it relates to Palestinians.
Right.
But it seems that a lot of people aren't aware of expulsions that took place of Jews.
Mm-hmm. We hear a lot about Palestinian refugees and about how many Palestinians were left Israel upon its creation, but we don't hear about the other group of refugees. While many Palestinians fled the war that was launched against Israel, a war that was launched by the Arab countries surrounding Israel. We're talking about 6 different countries from Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Egypt, and Jordan, and with support of the Arab League, launching a war against Israel. And it wasn't a war to get to get some more land or to change the borders. It was an existential war. It was a war to destroy the Jewish state and to make sure that it will not exist. During this war, of course, just like any other war around the world, especially one that is launched against a country trying to destroy it, and a group of refugees were created, Palestinian refugees that lived in this area, that actually participated in the war against the Jewish state. Many of them left. Many stayed, and until today we have actually Israeli Arabs that are what some will refer to as Palestinians. 20%, I believe, of the Israeli population are Israeli Arabs that have equal rights in the Jewish state. It's actually the only place in the Middle East that Arabs have equal rights and true sense of democracy. So we hear a lot about that, but one story that is not being heard and actually deafening silent from the international community is the story of the Jewish refugees from Arab countries. We're talking about a group of between 850,000 people to 1 million people Jews that lived in Arab countries. We're talking about the indigenous people of the Middle East, people that lived there for ages, that were oppressed so much, and the oppression has reached a point that they could not live. In Egypt, for instance, they were put on boats and had to live with one suitcase in their hand. Really felt a sense of pressure that led them to leave. And the only place that would take them, 1950, 1940, it wasn't a time that America opened the gates for immigrants from the Middle East. The only place that would take them was the Jewish state. So although, as many times I hear, especially on social media, on the internet, that Jews were happy to live in Arab countries, but it's not the true story. I can share my family, personally, my family is from North Africa. My father's side of the family came to Israel in the early 50s from North Africa. They, again, it's indigenous people, and I think that what hurts me the most is the fact that it's a culture that has been lost. I see pictures of my grandparents wearing indigenous customs from Tunisia that they used to wear for Jewish holidays, and all of these customs, everything they had to leave behind. When asking my grandmother from Tunisia about why they left, she said, that we were always treated nicely. And when I'm asking what nicely means, she says, we were Jews in an Arab country. We weren't Muslims, so we weren't equal. We were always below second-class citizens. When the Vichy regime, the French regime, was controlling Tunisia during World War II, they had to work in forced labor camps and wear a yellow star like their brothers, the Jews in Europe. But they always had to live in this oppressive reality that led in 1951 for them to just say, we can't live this way anymore, and they had to live with nothing. So it's not just the property that was stolen, it's not just the land that was stolen, it's the culture, and it's even a unique language. And that's my family from my father's side. My family from my mother's side came to Israel from Iraq. In Iraq, there was a population of 150,000 Jews, 150,000 people that lived there for ages. Once again, it's a community that's so ancient that we're talking about people that lived there from the time that Iraq was Babylonia, and then from what they call Bavel, and they came there from Judea, from what we know today as Israel. They were expelled from Israel to Babylonia, and Babylonia turned into Iraq, and then they were expelled again. A community that is restless, never finding a refuge. Actually, my grandmother told us the story. My grandmother from my mother's side always told us how she fled Iraq in 1951. She was in her 20s. They lived in Baghdad. They live actually near the main square in Baghdad, and she's coming back home one day. Again, the stories about the oppression and how they always lived as second-class citizens, even third-class citizens, compared to, she always said that some dogs were treated better. And now she returns back home one day to look for her dad, my great-grandfather. And she had a 2-year-old baby, my uncle, Itzik. She's going up the stairs to look for her dad, and she can't find him anywhere. She's approaching the window, and she's looking down to the square, and she sees bodies hang on poles, and she recognized the faces. It's a Jewish community that was executed, some of her friends, people that she knows from the community, but she also recognized the face of her dad, my great-grandfather, that was executed that day. He was accused of being a Zionist spy, and that's why he was executed. For my grandmother, this was the last straw. She knew she had to leave, because if her dad is executed, she will be next. So she took some photos, she took some money, she hid at the neighbors for a few days, and when it was safe, she left. And I think the only place, again, that will take her was Israel. And although many say that the Jewish population, the million Jews that lived in the Middle Eastern countries, not all of them were Zionists. It's correct. They weren't, they did have They did have inspiration to come to Israel. It's part of the religion, of the Jewish religion. But the organized Zionist movement was very weak in Arab countries, actually. But they were expelled. They were subject to such enormous pressure that they had no choice but to leave. And they always praying to come back to Jerusalem. They always pray to come back to Israel. But the idea of Zionism didn't came to those Arab countries until the 40s and the creation of Israel, and then they knew that there's a place for them to go to.
These are primarily, so this is where probably Israel gets, I hope I'm not mixing groups up here, but this is where the Sephardic population of Israel mostly comes from.
That's correct. Actually, today, 55% of Israeli Jews are Jewish refugees from Arab countries, are Sephardic, or some call them Mizrahis, but Jews that came from North Africa, and from the Middle East.
Okay, and essentially this persecution started around 1941?
It started around 1941. The organized prosecution, but for years before that, they lived as an oppressed minority in those countries because there were Jews living in Muslim countries, Arab countries. Then many times the law was prohibiting them from practice jobs that are saved for Muslims, or this kind of things that for ages that was the case, and they accepted it because there was no Jewish state, there was no place for them to go.
So this is similar to, like we hear, these areas have been taken over by ISIS.
That is correct, yeah.
The non-Jewish population, primarily Christian, but also other groups, they have to pray, what's it called? They have to pay zagat, the tax, and they cannot hold any positions of authority within the community.
Exactly. They are what is called in Arabic dhimmi. Dhimmi is status of sponsor. They need to pay tax. They need to pay tax for who they are to the government.
Okay, as opposed to the Arab population in Israel, which they can partake in anything in the government.
Not only can they partake, there is Arab parties. Actually, in the last election, the justice that oversee the election was Justice Salim Jubran, an Israeli Arab. That is one of the few judges in the Supreme Court in Israel, an Arab Israeli. Which is, of course, not the case and will probably never be the case in Arab countries in the Middle East, where a Jewish person will be able to be judge or to practice in law and then become one of the Supreme Court judges in a country, in an Arab country.
Mm-hmm. Now, why is it, do you think, because I know there's a lot of people out there that, you go on the internet and you're going to find people talking about Zionist conspiracies and stuff like that. It's almost like any article that deals with Israel, you look at the comment section underneath, and you have this kind of stuff being brought up. But yet, it seems that there's not that much knowledge about these events you're talking about, but there's a lot of knowledge about all these. It seems like it would be a very hard way of having a conspiracy if the history seems not to be getting out of the alleged conspirators.
That's a terrific question. It's one that I ask myself every day. And that's why I'm working in this organization and Stand With Us. That's what we do. We're trying to educate. I believe that, it's awful. It's such a wrong, a human wrong for the international community. It's something that we all should be ashamed of. And, but I would say I can't just accuse the international community. I think it's also those refugees. They were also part of the reason why the story is not told. When I remember talking to my grandmother and with both of them, they are such a strong two women, and they always said the most important thing for us was to come to a place that we can have a better future, that we can live freely, and finally we live as free people, we live as human beings. And they never used the word refugees. It was not in their lexicon. It was not in their in the way that they spoke about what happened to them. They came here with nothing, while the Palestinian refugees, when they left Israel to the Arab countries surrounding Israel, they were treated as refugees. They were put in refugee camps. They are still maintained as refugees. They are the only group of refugees that have a generational status. So if you are a refugee, your son will be a refugee. Even if he's born in Jordan, his son will be a refugee. His son will be a refugee. You can be 5 generations and still be a refugee, although you're not. I met a Palestinian refugee that goes to Yale. So, it's not what we have in mind when we think about refugees. While the group of Jewish refugees from Arab countries, this 850,000 people, 2 million, that when they came to Israel didn't put them in refugee camps. They put them in ma'abarot. Ma'abara in Hebrew means a transit camp. They were transited into the Israeli society. They received citizenship. Israel has put a lot of effort, a lot of resources to combine them into the Israeli society. I'm not saying that it was perfect. It was far from perfect, but Israel put a lot of effort to make them into this new society from this backward culture that they came from, which ended up with them becoming an integral part of the Israeli society. And this is the main difference, and I think this is why we don't hear about it enough. And that not goes to say that they don't deserve to be talked about. I think it's the most important thing. And actually today, June 1st is a day that in the United Nations, it's the first time that the Farhud will be recognized. The Farhud is the violent dispossession that was carried out against the Jewish population of Baghdad in Iraq. It happened in 1941 between June 1st and June 2nd. It was Shavuot, one of the 3 most important Jewish holidays, where over 1,000 Jews were severely injured. Around 200 were killed, brutally killed. And if I have a moment, I would like to read a short quote from one of the testimonies of the Farhud. Can I do?
Oh yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
As Baghdad burned, the Jewish existence became smoke spears against the sky. Jewish shops and homes were looted and then tortured. A synagogue was invaded, and its Torah burned in the classic Nazi fashion. Yet British troops remained minutes away, under orders from London not to move in last fear of Arab incitement against the oil infrastructure. Baghdad became a fast-moving hell. Frenzied mobs raced throughout the city and murdered Jews openly on the streets. Women were raped, their horrific families looked on, infants were killed in front of their parents, homes and stores were emptied and then burned. Gunshots and screams electrified the city for hours upon hours. Baghdadians sliced open babies, horrid torture, and multitudes the white spare. It's a quote from one of the testimonies of that day, and I'm sorry for my English. By the way, English is my 3rd language. My first language is Arabic, and second language is Hebrew. English is my 3rd. But this is one of the testimonies from Baghdad, and it's such an horrific story, but it's one that we don't hear about at all. And it's and the Farhud, this massacre of the Jews of Iraq, will finally be recognized by the United Nations. And I think that it's a small step towards real justice of this community that lost billions of dollars in property, in land, that we will never receive. We'll never receive it back. But it's just a small step in the way, but it's the right way. That this is one of the issues that need to be talked about.
Yeah, it should be noted too, right, that during the early 40s, Britain was trying to kind of keep a certain level of alliance with the local Arab populations because they were fighting in Europe. And if people migrated, for instance, from Europe into Israel, then there was a lot of protest in the local Arab community because they felt like they were kind of being invaded. And so many of the boats and stuff were turned back, weren't they?
Yeah, this is correct. They were turned back, and The British government, the British Army, stayed silent, as I read in the testimony, that while they saw that a real atrocity. I mean, people being brutally killed, and they can't do anything. They can, but they don't. And again, it's an awful history. I'm sure it's a very inconvenient truth about the Jewish population in the Arab countries. But what is more inconvenient is the fact that the West knew, and the West saw it, the British government and others in North Africa, they knew what's going on. They knew how oppressed the Jews are, and they were silenced. And unfortunately, I think that we see history kind of repeat itself. They say that on Friday they came for the Jews, but then on Sunday they come for the Christians, and that's what we see today with ISIS and across the Middle East, a Western deafening silence, while minorities are being killed and brutally oppressed, and the response is so weak, and that's my grandmother used to say that we always say never again, but it's happening over and over again for other groups, and it's unfortunate, but this is the reality today, that the word after World War II, after the Holocaust, said that never again would Jews be prosecuted, never again will minorities be prosecuted. So many international laws and international conventions and rules of engagements and how to partake in war, which is being completely ignored by this terrorist fundamental groups, extreme jihadist and terrorist group that are brutally oppressing minorities while the word is silenced. And it seems like never again is happening again. And it seems like more than anything that the Zionist movement was right. Because when I'm trying to imagine the world today without Israel, I mean, it's a terrible reality that comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, backing up just a little bit there, that I think I read an article about some representative from the World Jewish Congress that was actually trying to put light on the plight of the quickly vanishing Christian population of the Middle East. I mean, it's being pretty much decimated. If the people are either killed or they have to flee. And of course, when they have to move away from their countries, then their culture is lost, which I think sometimes people forget that it's hard to maintain your culture as an Iraqi Christian if you're suddenly living in London. It's very difficult. But we're hearing never again, but it seems that we hear a lot more that, I mean, blatant examples of anti-Semitism that you would not have heard about 10 years ago seems to be kind of creeping into the culture. And I mean, not like, organized mobs of, I don't know, KKK or something like that, but just like what I said a few minutes ago, that a lot of commentary on the internet and stuff and social media is really focused negative to Israel, and I don't see a balance in that respect. I don't see lots of people saying, well, now wait a minute. What do you think is behind this, and what can be done about that? I mean, we're not talking censorship or anything, but there is. If you only hear one side, you're going to obviously you're going to think, well, these are the bad guys and these are the good guys.
Yeah, I mean, the situation today on the internet and social media is terrible. Of course, there's asymmetry. I mean, there's maybe 14 million Jews around the world. 6 million of them are in Israel. And there is 1.3 billion Arabs, I believe, in throughout the world. And I'm not going to say that, of course, there's a lot of Arabs and Muslims that are supporting Israel and that are moderate and want peace and don't think that Israel should be destroyed. But unfortunately, the majority is against Israel, and There's asymmetry in the numbers there. So it's really difficult for us to fight. And it's just terrible. I think the worst thing is that today I see that Jew hatred is being very, it's very politically correct. Today it's the most politically correct hatred. You cannot talk about radical Muslim terrorist groups because then you will be accused in Islamophobia. But as soon as you'll say to someone that he is obsessed with the Jewish state and that it might be anti-Semitic, you'll be called out for using the anti-Semitic card and talking about things that you shouldn't talk about. There's a taboo to speak about hatred to Jews, and it's terrible. Working for this organization, many times I'm going on college campuses, oftentimes in the U.S., and I see this growing movement of usually I'm sharing my story of serving in the Israeli army, in the humanitarian unit of the Israeli army. And I just see hatred. I see people, calling me terrible names, saying horrible things. And it's legitimate because it's against Israel. And I think that today Israel has replaced the Jewish people. It's the Jewish nation. And although many of the people that criticize Israel are really doing it from they're not all anti-Semites. I think Professor Ellen Dershowitz once said that if critics of Israel if every critic of Israel would be called anti-Semite, Tel Aviv would be the place with the highest population of anti-Semites, because in Tel Aviv people are very critical of Israel. So you can be critical of Israel, but we see this obsession that. From what we saw with FIFA just recently, when the FIFA, the soccer football group had to face the Palestinians in this group has asked to boycott Israel, and then in the last moment they changed their mind and said that they don't want to ask Israel. There was a massive attack. I mean, there was protesters again outside of the FIFA meeting and inside breaking in. I mean, it's this sort of fanatism. It's football. That's what we're talking about, and you still see this fanatic, this obsession with the Jewish state. And for me personally, I mean, it's becoming more and more popular. But people that always stood in the right side of history, people that want to do what's right, need to stand up for Israel, because many causes in the history of mankind were not popular. I mean, opposing slavery was not popular in the beginning. The civil rights movement, I mean, to oppose the Nazis in Europe was not popular in some time. But it's the right thing to do, and people of goodwill, people that want to stand on the right side of Israel, on the right side of history, should stand with Israel, because I think that's the modern day we shall overcome. It's the we shall overcome of the Jewish people, and we should all stand together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Could you tell a little bit about how people could find out more about your organization? Because I'd never heard of it before, just like a month and a half ago when I got.
Sure. So we're very active on social media. I think that's one of our biggest strengths. We have pages in 12 languages. We actually have a page in Arabic as well that is doing very well. So you can look us up in every social media outlet, from Facebook. You can look up Stand With Us, and there's a lot of interesting posts there, and on Twitter. Otherwise, we are also, you can send us a note through the Facebook page, and ask us how you can be active in your community or in your area. We're always looking for volunteers. We also have a website that you can put your email there and get information from us. It's standwithus.com. And personally, if you want to speak to me or engage in a dialogue with me, I mean, I'm available on Twitter. It's Hen Mazig. It's HenMazzig. And we are more than happy to help and assist everyone. I mean, there is so much to do, and we really need whoever can help us.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you'd like to leave with the listening audience besides just how to get involved, but just one last thing that can kind of say, you should think about this or consider this?
I mean, I grew up in Israel not knowing that there is any problem with Israel. I never thought that there's a world movement against us. Israel is doing well today. I think that Israel is doing very well economically and in security, although we live in a tough neighborhood. But it was just shocking to see how much hatred there's out there for Israel, and for me to, I completely changed my life to choose a career that it's not really a career, it's just something that I'm passionate about, and I want to help Israel, but it's not just about Israel. It's about about real hope, and I think that the strongest thing that Israel has and that Israel used throughout the years since our existence until today is hope, is to maintain this hope for a better future and to never lose hope, and celebrate life while people around us celebrate death. And if there's any hope for the Middle East, it will come from this small country, the only democracy in the Middle East, the only place that offers freedom for Muslims, for Christians, for every minority. And if you want to support this, and if you believe in those values of freedom and equality and celebrating life and maintaining life and protecting life, Israel is the cause that you need to care about the most in the world, in the Middle East. And thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Hey, thank you for coming on. I learned a whole bunch, and now it's just got me wanting to go out there and start researching some of the interesting items of history and politics that you brought up. So again, thank you very much for sharing your time with us, Hen. That was a very